Hello, my name is Persephone Abbott, and the title of this video is What is Eldon and Terry Mast's Tribute to Longmont poet and author and artist Keith Kumasen Abbott? I have here my father's accepted partial completion document for the requirements for the degree of Master of Arts, entitled The Design in William Carlos Williams Patterson. It's signed. His archives are at the University of Washington in Bellingham. So coming to the end of an exhaustive week's worth of reading in Bellingham at the University of Western Washington in the archives, which houses the materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, who was born in 1944 and died in 2019, I would like to make some points about my father's literary legacy. This week has made it painfully clear that aside from the missing journals or notebooks, the following manuscripts for a start are also missing from the archives. Whack Jobs, which is an autobiographical work covering his college years, written between the years 2007, 2009, and perhaps further. HW2, 2009, Thelma and Louise Meet Jack Kerouac, a provisionary title, from 1998, Good Golly, Miss Molly, from 1994, Boy Scout Cookies, from 1994, Percy Q, 1977, The Secondary Room, 1971, Mr. In-Between, 1977, False Courage, 1981, Arty Farty Love, 1998, The Second Time I Saw Pete, 1997, At the Top of the Heap, 1970, Francis, 1970, The Plays, The Nugget, 1982, The Sob Machine, The Rhubarb, 1971, Reno, Loyalty Oath, Babe Ruth screenplays, Babe Ruth and the Screenplays, Spanish Castle, and Good Golly, Miss Molly, for a start. So the archivist said to me, "It seems that your mother sabotaged the archives." Yes. Thankfully, poet and author and artist Pat Nolan supplied some samples of my father's early wit and energy by donating letters Keith wrote to him in the late 60s and early 70s, mid-70s, when they were collaborating on the publication of Blue Suede Shoes, a poetry collation that featured many of the poets of the era in the 1970s. In these letters, my father's genius, his youth, his daring, and his hedonism all come through. In my opinion, those letters make up the gold in the archives, along with the one manuscript, the only manuscript in novel form in the archives, and that is Low Tech Blues. So what happened? Eldon and Terry Mast were allowed to purchase Keith Kumasen Abbott's house after my parents' death in Longmont, Colorado. The house was on 1046 Grant Street, and with the purchase of the house came the rest of the contents that were in it, left over. The house was flipped for a profit. Eldon Mast and Terry Stutzman Mast also handled the missing archival materials. Their son-in-law states that Eldon and Terry Mast are claiming that the materials were, quote, disposed of, unquote, as per the comment on my YouTube video. Further, Eldon Mast has made a statement on LinkedIn on September 11th, 2024. Documentation can be found in the link below. So what happened? It could be said that my mother, who unfortunately exhibited malignant narcissistic behavior towards family members and towards her husband at the end of his and her own life, hijacked the memory of my father and his legacy. There was no obituary for Keith except for Pat Nolan's online homage, which was posted months after he died. There was no funeral service or family services. My father's lawyer filed Keith's testament months after my mother's own death, which was 2 years after Keith's own death. My mother did not inform his lawyer of his death. What my mother sent to the archives in Bellingham were boxes of materials that were filled with duplicate or triplicate printouts of emails and or basically filler material to make up the bulk or beef up the boxes. She was lucid when she did this. The notes she included as explanations, her explanations of my father's history, are lucid. My mother's durable medical power of attorney never had to take over any tasks, ever. At the end of her life, she was lucid. And after my mother's own death, Rabbi Diane Tifrit-Laken from the Boulder Synagogue produced an eulogy in which, as my mother's partner, Keith was reduced to a state of infantilism and or an imbecile-like scenario, and my mother was extolled. And the eulogy was prearranged by my mother. Let me explain the games my mother played a little further with an example. For instance, I was somewhat uncertain what to think about my mother being registered as a Republican when I saw this fact online. She was not, as many would think, a Republican by nature, and going as far as registering for the party, it would not be her normal inclination, yet she very much enjoyed pulling the wool over people's eyes. This particular issue got cleared up for me when I read in one of my father's letters to his friend, a letter which is at the archives, that my mother's Republican registration was, quote, paying off dividends, unquote. In other words, she registered for the Republican Party as a joke and for personal gain. You could say she registered for the purpose of meddling, which would, of course, amuse her. And you might think this funny, and in a way, it could be considered funny, but then start to apply this amusement of hers with the synagogue, the churches she joined, the organizations she joined, the moments when she could display some show of empathy for people and then move on into their lives and or their organizations. She had a particular manner and way of developing a sort of cult-like following. As one of my parents' acquaintances said to me after my mother's death, quote, a lot of people swallowed your mother's Kool-Aid, unquote. So what happened? Someone has said to me, quote, I thought the timing of Keith's death, ... unquote. I'm not providing any further explanation, but I am 100% certain. And that leads me to the question, what is Eldon and Terry Mast's tribute to poet and author and artist Keith Kumasen Abbott? Eldon and Terry, where are the manuscripts? For example, where is the manuscript? Eldon and Terry Mast for Arfie Darfie Love. I'm looking for it. More importantly, where is the manuscript for Keith's autobiography entitled Whack Jobs?